Welcome to the channel, and this time we're painting Boris Karloff from the Bride of Frankenstein. Well, maybe not this one, it's already painted. We're going to be painting this. And yeah, this one's already painted too, but it used to look like this, and we're going to make it look like this.
Good, good. Good.
Thanks, Boris. Let's get started.
This is bread. Bread. Bread.
In 1935, director James Whale, makeup artist Jack Pierce, and actor Boris Karloff combined their talents to create an iconic character, updating an already internationally recognized symbol of horror.
Good. Good.
90 years later, sculptor Jeff Yeager and producer Paul Gill teamed up to create this masterful tribute. This is a traditionally sculpted and molded resin bust, sculpted in clay and cast in a silicone mold. Yeager has captured Karloff's likeness and expression perfectly, and this casting had only the most minor of blemishes. On the lower eyelids, you can see small defects easily remedied with modeling paste. This is a filler I use for any blemishes up to about 1 millimeter. A slightly larger blemish on the eyelid was filled with Avi's epoxy sculpt, which I use for defects larger than 1 millimeter. I left the Avi's to cure until the following day. There were also some pinholes in the hair to deal with, and these little blemishes are part of the hobby and they're easy to fix. The real advantage of modeling paste is its consistency. It really is a paste, a very loose paste. In some places you can dip a paintbrush into it and just apply it directly to the kit with a paintbrush, or you can use a spatula if you prefer. If you have some larger areas where using a spatula would be more appropriate, you can just apply it directly to a flat surface. But for areas like hair, a paintbrush is best. Just use a little bit of water and the modeling paste will smooth right out and get into all those cracks, crevices, and pinholes. So here we're going to apply some of the modeling paste to this area of the hair. Just dab it in with the paintbrush, and you'll see immediately that it fills all those holes very simply. Don't be afraid about getting the modeling paste into the grooves or the valleys between those strands of hair or fur if you're doing, say, a Wolfman kit. Again, just dip your paintbrush into some water, dab off some of the excess water, and then apply it to the kit. The modeling paste will even out very quickly, very easily, and the holes, the pinholes that were there, will remain filled while the rest of the modeling paste evens out. Once you prime the kit, and then once you apply paint, none of the modeling paste that fills in these divots or that runs into these divots will obscure any of the details. One of the simplest ways to get rid of the modeling paste as it gathers between the strands of hair or fur is to just run an X-Acto knife blade between the strands of hair or fur. It'll scoop out the excess modeling paste. You can just wipe it away. You can also apply modeling paste with a wet finger, or you can wipe it away with a wet finger. There's a little divot here on the back, and I'll show you. Just wet my brush a little bit, scoop out some modeling paste, apply it to the kit. Here's a nice little dab, and a little swipe of my finger. Fills in the divot. It's just that simple, just that easy. And the divot is filled. In addition to being easy to apply with either a spatula, a brush, or even your finger, a great advantage of modeling paste is that it dries really quickly. You can prime within minutes and then get painting. Now that a coat of primer has been applied, we can see just how well the modeling paste has filled in those pinholes in the hair. You really have to get up close to be able to see any leftover indentations, and that's easily taken care of with another light coating of the modeling paste and priming over it once again. So I like to prime in different colors for different effects. So in the case of the Frankenstein monster, Boris Karloff's skin tone was very light. I'll be using the rust red as the undercoat to help achieve shadow and to give a redness to the skin. I like to prime rock or stone in a dark brown or a black for the same reason. It helps create the shadows very quickly. I'll go over that with grays and whites later on and even some browns, but the undercoat of dark brown or in some cases black will really help create the shadows and create some depth and some volume. And I've spray painted the fireplace and the flames white because I think, as everybody knows, trying to spray paint yellow or use yellow over any color other than white is a real challenge. So start with a light color, especially if you're going to be using yellow. The skin color that I'm using is a very pale, light skin color. It's actually called pale flesh, but it is a very pale skin color. And I'm going to be spraying this at a downward angle of about 45 degrees. And again, that's to help preserve some of the shadows, especially under the eyes, in the mouth, around the nose. So here we go. Now I'm going to let some of the flesh get into the hairline because this depiction of Boris Karloff as the Frankenstein monster comes from the Bride of Frankenstein. So this is after the windmill fire in the first movie, and his hair has been singed, which is why you can see the staples at the top of the head. Don't forget to get behind the ears and the neck. And don't go too heavy. Let some of that rust primer that you sprayed in, or that I've sprayed in at least, let that do some of the work for you. I'm spraying very lightly, turning the bust as we go. Now it's time to apply some speckling with a flesh wash, and this is to break up the skin to make it look a little bit more natural because, as we all know, everybody has little red spots, little blemishes, etc. in their skin. So I'm going to rock the trigger back and forth with my flesh wash and lay in some of those dots. I'm just going to test it on my glove first, make sure that I have appropriate sized dots. That seems fine. This not only breaks up the skin, gives it a little bit of texture, if you will, but it also adds some redness to the skin, which is what we want. Don't be too concerned if you get a large spot. This is because I'm getting some tip dry and some buildup of paint, so I'm just going to wipe off the tip. Don't be too concerned if that happens to you if you do decide to use this technique. I've got my Q-tip in hand, my cotton swab in hand, and I'm just going to actually apply a touch of water and dab some of that off. Don't be too concerned because later on, when we apply some washes, a lot of this will fade into the background, which is what we want. The work has been sealed. I've preserved the work that I've done on the portrait and on the hand using Tester's Dull Coat. This is becoming tougher and tougher to find, but it is my go-to sealer. This is what I like to seal between coats with so that I preserve my work. The advantage of this is that it dries really within minutes and you can continue working after about 5 or 10 minutes. Just give it about 5 or 10 minutes to dry and you're probably good to go. But considering it is getting harder and harder to find, I have started to use Vallejo acrylic matte varnish. This gives a very nice dull finish. The disadvantage of this is that it takes much longer to dry. So you would have to wait a good hour, I would say, between coats of varnish before you can go back and start painting again. So Tester's Dull Coat when you can, something like Vallejo. There are other brands on the market, but these are the two that I've used most often. Now that the varnish has dried, it's time to knock back some of this speckling so that it lies under the skin. And for that, I'm going to use a transparent version of the light skin color that I sprayed initially. You want to use a very light touch here because you only want to knock back the speckling. You don't want to completely hide it. You want to still be able to see it through the transparent color. And because this is a transparent version of the skin color that I used earlier, I'm not too concerned about spraying up and brightening some of those areas that were in shadow. They're still in shadow, but now they're less in shadow than they were. Now we have a little bit of depth and we've maintained some of the shadow from the primer that I sprayed in at the outset. Now it's time to apply the washes, blue, yellow, and red. Make sure you have sponges standing by, and these need to be damp because after you've applied the wash to the kit, you're going to sponge off some of the excess paint. I also make sure that I have cotton swabs standing by so that I can get into some of the deeper parts of the kit and get rid of any of the paint that has pooled that I don't want to leave on the kit. I also break up the surface tension of the water by using a little bit of liquid hand soap on the tip of the brush. I mix that in with the water and the paint, and that helps the paint flow nice and deeply into all the cracks and crevices and wrinkles, all the details that you want the wash to accentuate. I like to use a ratio of about 6 to 1, 6 drops of water to 1 drop of paint for especially the yellow and the red. When it comes to blue, I probably apply a ratio of something like 8 to 1, 8 drops of water to 1 drop of blue, because I find blue tints very quickly and it's unforgiving. If you have too much blue, you're going to end up starting over again. So I am going to begin with blue. Blue will deaden the skin and give us some of those underlying vein colors that we want. So I'm just going to apply this very quickly all over the portrait. And remember, what I do to the portrait, I'm also going to be doing to the hand. And even though this video may not show what I'm doing to the hand, it is going to be treated in exactly the same way. You have to go relatively quickly because, as I mentioned, blue will stain and it's a little unforgiving. So let's get the blue in there as quickly as we can. And the camera will focus on my hand, so I'm trying to get my hand out of the way as quickly as possible. So now I apply my damp sponge, and I just dab lightly. And what we're going for here is a tinting of the skin. We're just trying to knock back some of the flesh color, deaden it a little bit. And you see what I mean about some of the paint pools in areas, especially in the ears, under the eyes, around the neckline. And you don't necessarily want that blue line in the ears or at the neckline. So I'm going to use one of my cotton swabs, and I'm just going to pick up some of the excess. And I'm not scraping, I'm just dabbing. Just picking up some of the excess. Don't want to see too much of the blue obvious on the kit. Just like that, a light dabbing. Because again, the objective of these washes is to tint the skin. I'm not too concerned about in the hair, because this is going to be covered over mostly by the black and the brown of the hair color. And again, after you've applied your color, seal, because we are going to be applying yellow and red on top of this. And if you don't seal, if you apply your yellow and red washes too quickly after having applied the blue, you may be lifting up some of the paint. I've sealed the portrait and the hand, and I'm not sure if the camera is going to be able to pick it up. I can certainly see it here in person, but some of the blue paint has left distinct patterns as I've sponged it off, and they almost replicate veins. So it really does give you that look that you're looking for of life under the skin, of blood vessels and veins. Now I'm going to be applying yellow and red to brighten it up, and the red will have the same effect as the blue. It'll give the impression of blood vessels. So I'm just going to wet my brush, dip it into a little bit of the liquid soap so that I can, again, break up the surface tension of the water that is mixed in with the yellow paint. And again, just as a reminder, I'm using a ratio of 6 drops of water to 1 drop of paint. And once again, I'll just slather it on the kit very quickly. Unlike the blue, which I find stains rapidly, and so you can't leave it on the kit very long, yellow doesn't stain as quickly. So you can leave it on the kit a little bit longer to get the desired effect. And again, I apologize for the camera going in and out of focus. That's just a result of my hand moving in front of the kit. I'll do this very quickly so that you can get a good look at what's going on. And again, around the hairline, where some of the hair has been burned off from the first film, you'll see that the underlying coat of blue is adding just a hint of green. Now, I'm not necessarily a fan of a green Frankenstein monster. I don't mind a hint of green here and there, but I prefer to use colors that are much more realistic. I'm comfortable leaving this color on the kit longer than the blue because, as I mentioned, yellow takes a longer time. It's a very subtle color. It takes a longer time to stain or to tint the kit. I'm just going to sponge it off very lightly. I'm going to leave a lot more of the yellow on the kit than I did of the blue. So I'm just taking my time, getting rid of really the pools of paint more than anything else. Just a light tapping here and there with the sponge. Getting it out of the recesses where it's really pooling. And I'm going to take my cotton swab, Turn it around so that I'm not contaminating it with the end that has the blue paint. I'm just dabbing it. And once again, I'll seal the kit so that I'm protecting the work that I've done. It really is personal taste how much color you leave on the kit. I'm comfortable with the way that looks right now. Now that the yellow's been sealed, I just want to point out how some of the layering of colors is really adding to the character of the kit. So we began with a rust primer. We speckled after we did the flesh, initial flesh color. Then we applied some of our washes. We misted as well over the flesh some of the transparent skin color. And when you take a look at the result, you'll see quite a few colors working together to tell a story. So you can still see some of the rust primer. You can still see some of the blue. You can still see some of the skin color that I use, the pale skin color. You can see the yellow. It's all working together to tell a story. And depending on where you spray your paint and where you don't spray your paint, you help yourself out. So I've got redness at the tip of the nose, redness under the eyes, redness at the collar line. So these are all natural areas where you find shadow. So if you take a little bit of time and you think about what you're doing and how you're doing it, you can really get a nice result. Now it's time to apply the red. As with the yellow, I'm going to apply this everywhere, and I'm going to let it sit a little bit longer than I let the blue sit. I'm going to let the red really tint the skin and warm it up. And again, I apologize if the camera is out of focus from time to time. It's picking up my hand with the paintbrush. I'll try to stay as steady as I can. And even though I'm not showing what I'm doing to the hand is getting exactly the same treatment as the portrait. All right, I'm going to let that sit. Even though the Frankenstein monster is composed of dead body parts, there is blood coursing through his veins. He is alive, as Dr. Frankenstein famously shouted. Squeeze off some more of the excess on this sponge. And as I did with the yellow, I'm going to be very light with my touch. I want the red to be there more so than the blue, because we want the red to show us the life in the monster. Red and yellow warm, blue cools. Okay, most of it is off with the sponge, and I'm content with that. So I'm just going to use my new cotton swab to pick up some of the excess. And again, not scraping, just dabbing very lightly, picking up the pools of paint. And I am going to be applying washes afterwards, glazes, I should say, afterwards, to further highlight the skin. And I might play with the color a little bit, adding a little bit more blue and possibly even a hint of green, even though, as I said earlier, I'm not a fan of a green Frankenstein's monster. Those colors will help convey the fact that the monster is made up of various body parts of corpses. So just dab away the pools. And again, seal your work. One of the great things about the sealer, the varnish that I use, is that it actually helps blend the paint, which is a great little property of Tester's Dull Coat. Okay, I'm happy with that. Time to seal. I like to use a wet palette when I mix paint for the final application on the portrait. And there are a couple of advantages to using a wet palette. Number one, of course, is as a palette, it's very easy to mix colors. But the second and most important part of using a wet palette is that your paint lasts a lot longer and you don't need to use as much of it. The moisture from the sponge under the paper seeps up into the paint and keeps it active for a long time. I can keep this paint on this palette for about a day or two without having to add more paint to it. So if you haven't used a wet palette before, I recommend using it. The colors I'll go over very quickly. I'm using my original pale skin color, a transparent magenta, a transparent orange, a flesh wash, a transparent blood color, a creamy white, and a blue. And I'm going to be mixing the blue in with the skin color or a combination to make up a skin color along with the blue. And that will help to paint the veins, especially on the back of the hand. So I will be using blue, but only as an undercoat so that I can apply more skin colors on top, push that back underneath, and make it look like veining. So I've mixed up a basic skin color. It's a combination of light skin and dark skin on the same palette in close proximity to each other, and it allows me to switch quickly from color to color as I'm applying it. Now, as I've mentioned in some of the other videos, you want some of the redder skins, the skin where you would expect to find more blood, to be at the tips of the ears, the nose, the chin, and under the eyes. So I'm just going to apply some of these darker skin tones to the tops of the ears, to the ear lobes. And I also have a little container of water nearby, and I'm going to use that to thin some of this paint because this is a glaze that we're applying, and it is used to slightly alter the color. But you do want to see some of the other colors that you've painted underneath. So that's why it's just a slight alteration of the color. I think I've mentioned in the past that you really do need to, if you're trying to achieve a realistic skin, it really is important for you to look at sources and notice where skin colors change on individuals. So you'll find, as I mentioned, that there are darker or redder colors at the tops and bottoms of the ears, slightly brown inside the ear. So you can apply a slightly brown color inside the ear, slightly redder at the chin and the nose. So I'm just mixing up a fresh color and applying some of the pale skin. What I have on my palette is a little too red. And again, use water. We want to thin this paint and just tint what we have. You can even use some speckling, and it'll accent what you've got. So if you don't want to apply with a broad stroke, you can just dab in spots. And you can wipe away. So let me reach for a cotton swab. And I'm just going to dab away some of what I've applied and leave behind in spots some of the color. And it really does add to the realism. So this is the preliminary result after having applied some of the glazes, some of the flesh glazes. As you can see, the scar under the jaw, the burn marks on the forehead and on the face, and where the electrodes connect on the neck. They've all been given a very red glaze, which has then been feathered out to blend in a little bit more naturally with the surrounding skin. As well, I've gone over the eyes, and it may look a little harsh right now, but the eyes now have a little bit more redness to them, a little bit more brown, as well as the forehead. The ears have been completed inside and on the outer edges. Keep in mind that the hair isn't in yet. Once the hair is blocked in, the skin will take on a different appearance. Once the clothing is in, the skin will take on a different appearance. And I'll adjust at that point. I may go back to the portrait and do some punching of color here and there, but for the most part, the basic portrait is complete. The next step is going to be blocking in the hair, and I'm going to be dry brushing some darker colors, either a dark brown or a dark black. Haven't made up my mind yet. And that will give more context to the face. It'll better frame the face, and I'll know then whether I need to add a little bit more color, and if so, where. What I've got now is a bust that has a little bit of hair showing, especially along the top of the head. You can see some of the scalp where I want it to show. I will go over this again with a fine brush and with some undiluted black paint, just to pick up some of the areas that I think need to be filled in and to pick up individual hairs so that it blends more naturally at the hairline on the scalp. Off camera, I misted a pale red wash followed by a very light green wash, a ratio of about 10:1, just to add a bit more color to the face. The clothing is based on archival photos of the costume. For much of the jacket, you can just slap it on, but of course, the closer you get to the figure, the more time you have to take. You don't want to ruin the paint job that you've already got. Off camera, I finished most of the work on the bust, and I won't bore you with the details. I did the teeth and I did the eyes, and at this scale, the eyes are not very complex to do. There's not a whole lot of detail that you can achieve in the eyes except the basic colors. Most of the detailing came in the weathering of the jacket, and so for that I applied a couple of washes. One is a transparent smoke, which is really a very thin black. Another one that I used is a transparent oil, which is a thin black and a thin brown, which gives a very grimy look. And then I applied some pigments mixed with water for the dust and the dirt that's on the lapels, the collar, the shoulders, and the shirt of the outfit that the creature is wearing. The stone fireplace and the fire effect is next. As you can see, this is an old stone fireplace, so we need to paint something that looks like old stones. So what I'm going to do is use a dark gray. This happens to be woods and water, but any dark gray will do. Sorry, it's out of focus. I'll try to get that in focus. There we go. So a dark gray, a lighter gray, which will go on top and add some contrast. A lighter gray still. And again, the make of the paint really doesn't matter so long as you have good coverage. I'm going to try to preserve as much as possible some of the darker browns so that we don't lose the shadow. But I will also be looking at a brown wash over the stone as well. And then, of course, the fire effect will go on top of that. So let's get started. Brown washes have now been applied, and I went inside the fire pit part of the fireplace and dry brushed in a lot of black. And then I carried that black out over the tops of the stones, trying to mimic how the flames, how the soot, how the scorching would behave. So onto the sides out, onto the bottom out over the rocks. Next is the fire effect inside the fireplace and on the flames from the burning logs that go inside the fireplace. The colors I used for the fire were dry brushed onto the stone to give a glowing effect. And there you have it, Karloff in all his monstrous glory. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and oh yeah, I added a little sketch on the back just to put the bride in the Bride of Frankenstein. See you in the next video.